You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 88 for July 6th, 2016. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about how site recording methodology is chained to the paper form and about working after the workday is done, or what's known as free archaeology. It's a lively discussion today. So grab a nice ale and a shot of whiskey because you're about to have a head trip. Oh, and because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are Stephen in Calgary.
Hello.
Sonia in Utah.
Hi.
And Doug in Scotland.
Hello.
Okay, so our lofty goal today is to have three segments on essentially three different topics. We'll see. I'm going to try to keep everybody to that because we tend to go beyond what I think a segment can be, and honestly, each one of these, at least two of these, could probably be a show unto themselves. But we'll do our best to rein it in and really just kind of give the serious thoughts we have on these topics. So jumping right into it, then the first topic is going to be about methodology and paper site forms. Okay, and what I mean by that is we've had we've been thinking through site recording in the last few weeks. Myself, my colleague, and I with the Codify, Codify.com. And we've been trying to think, when we're creating site forms, we're trying to do this thing, and we're going to have a Codify podcast over on the Archaeotech podcast here really soon, so go check that out. But what we've been thinking is, a lot of people right now, when they're thinking about taking paper site forms and moving them to a digital platform in the field, what they're really doing is they're just basically putting paper on glass. That's the phrase we've been using. What that means is that it's still the paper form. It's just in a digital format, whether that's a Word document, a fillable PDF, or some sort of database application such as I was using, like tap forms, okay? Those are all just fields that you fill out similar to the paper site form, right? So if anybody's heard of anybody doing a different style of recording, a different style of data input, and I'll get to that in a minute, please comment, because I haven't heard of anybody doing anything different other than just simply filling out fields that that are on the paper site form. So anyway, one of the concepts we've been working through is developed from that is not just a different way of thinking about sites and entering site data, but the thought that our actual site recording processes in this day and age, now maybe not from the project manager or principal investigator standpoint who have these lofty goals of research questions in their mind, but all the way down to the field technician, what we're doing, our entire methodology is based on what's on that form, okay? Our entire methodology is based on the fields that are on that form, and very few people at the actual boots on the ground level are actually thinking about what those fields mean and why they came about, and whether or not we can actually work outside of those and think, okay, is this what I'm limited to recording, or can I actually record a little bit more if I had the time and efficiency capabilities to do that? So before I go much farther, though, Stephen and Doug are both commenting in the background saying that different people are doing different things. Stephen, you commented first. What do you got?
There's a lot to unpack here. I think a lot more archaeologists are going beyond the paper form in the way that you're describing.
How so?
Well, in a lot of different ways. So that's why I'm kind of like, oh, geez, we could fill this show here. One way is for, like, say, digital recording. We've had this discussion for three years now, and what a lot of firms do for digital recording is more associated with like geographic information systems, where what you're actually doing is structured data that can easily be exported into the paper format, but is not necessarily a one-to-one, like I'm just filling out the paper format. And the ironies of all this, you must be using digital forms and digital tablets and stuff like that, is in a lot of ways, to those of us who have been using actual digital field methods, like Trimble units and whatnot, it's a massive step backward. So I agree that your complaint about, we're just doing digital forms of paper forms. That's what a lot of people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also those plenty of archaeologists who are using the digital tablets that maybe the form looks the same, but what's coming out the back end on the database side is actually structured in a way to make it comparable with both their internal database systems, but also like for example, here in Alberta, we have to do digital data submissions, and there's a lot of debate about whether these the data that we're supplying, is that appropriate or not. But this is defined by Alberta Culture and Tourism, so which on the plus side makes it comparable across the province. That if I'm submitting digital data, it's in the same format, it's in the same criteria as what another archaeologist from another firm is submitting. So I guess that's probably the best way to start.
Let me comment on that, because let me clarify what I was saying, because you're right. The input of data onto tablets and things like that, the export is actually changing a little bit right now. I agree with that. And that's kind of what you're talking about, the export into databases and what we can do with the data that's collected. But what and that's totally fair. But what I'm kind of talking about is what we're actually collecting hasn't changed. The information that we're collecting is still tied to whatever information was on the paper form originally. We're not collecting additional data in a lot of cases. Maybe some people are, but in most cases that I've seen, we're not collecting additional data or different data or something like that. If the form says, write a site description and give me the coordinates and the measurements, then we're writing a site description and giving coordinates and measurements, right? So,
well, yeah, but part of that isn't just the media that we're using, right? That's the methodology that's been borne out over several decades.
Right,
that,
but based on paper and budget.
Where those innovations come are not necessarily from, like what the media is that we're using to record, but the innovations come from how we are using the archaeological record to interpret, and that's completely divorced from the mechanics of the recording.
I wholeheartedly disagree. I wholeheartedly disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because this project that we were working with down in southeastern Colorado, not a CRM project, but they're doing very CRM type things, and it got me thinking. When we're on a site, and I'll give you an example of a prehistoric and a historic site. When we're out there, the two things, one on prehistoric and one on historic, that are never really recorded in a way other than just a tick mark on a form. On historic sites, that's glass shards, okay? Like undiagnostic glass shards, they just get a tick mark on a form. Okay, I've got green, I've got brown, I've got aqua, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I walk away from the site and I've got 15 of this, 10 of that, and 5 of that. Same thing with debitage, lithic debitage. So if it's non-diagnostic or it's not a tool, then it usually just gets a tick mark. It doesn't get often recorded in the Trimble. They never get photographs. They never get anything like that. So we've decided along the way, and I really highly doubt that this is based on methodology and people saying, oh, well, we've decided because of the archaeological record and how we analyze data that the amount of information we're collecting about these two particular things is enough. But in reality, I believe it's probably born out of CRM and budgets. And like Sonia's saying in the background, collecting unnecessary data and the goals of the project, it's all comes down to funding. So the reason I'm not taking a point on every single glass shard on a historic site is because who has the time for that? It's not written into the budget.
I would say that, really quickly, because I want Sonia to jump in with that question.
Yeah.
I would say that your examples of not recording the debitage in any great detail, is probably regionally specific, because most of the other places I've worked, it is actually recorded, at least at the level of cortex and material type, and then location in that, if it came from a shovel test, record where the shovel test is.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
from the surface doing a boundary on, right?
Yeah.
But you're doing counts, and up here it's even more so that they, even on survey, it's coming back to the lab and they are analyzing it just like they would analyze it for any level of mitigation.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll Sonia, ask your question here shortly, because I'll clarify just to, Stephen, just to clarify what I was saying. Yes, that is on, what I'm talking about is normally on pedestrian survey, because out here in the West, we don't hardly collect anything. So because we're not collecting it, it's not getting further analysis than what we do in the field. And since we have a limited amount of time and money in the field, there is stuff that goes by the wayside, and every company does that. Now, if you're doing an excavation, which, shovel testing is excavation, I mean, you're digging and you're collecting stuff, then yes, of course, in those cases, things are getting further analyzed. So I guess I'm referring to the times where you don't collect artifacts, or you don't take them back to a lab or even a field lab or something like that. So that's what I'm talking about. We'll forget about any sort of digging, because we obviously collect everything when we dig.
No, like we did field curation for shovel test when I was in Wisconsin. So basically anything that you found in the shovel test, unless it was a diagnostic, basically went back in the hole. But you're recording where the hole is, and you are recording the material type, at least on a broad spectrum. Is it chert? Is it, quartzite? Is it orthoquartz? But then also, is it primary, secondary, tertiary? I mean, we're not size sorting, we're not weighing, but, at the survey level, you're identifying, things that could be looked at in a further level, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't want to.
Yeah, let's move to Sonia.
Okay, so I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here, from a business perspective and on the client's kind of from their perspective. Why should we be collecting more data than we're contracted to collect?
Right.
That's some clients have gotten very upset when we spend more of their time and money collecting data that's not necessary to meet the project goals.
That is my point entirely. My point is, our methodology is based on client goals. Our methodology is based on the budget. It's not based on the archaeology. That's the point I'm trying to make here.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And if the client actually says, no, I want you to do research in the field, and when you're out doing a phase 1 or a class 3 inventory, depending on where you're located, then okay, great. Then we can budget for that. We can get the time for that, and then we can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
But making that application or generalizing that we should be collecting more data isn't always going to meet the schedule and the goals of the project. So we need to be very careful of that and take those into consideration.
Right.
Well, wait. What is the client doing dictating what the archaeological methods are?
Well, they do that with the budget.
Well, the client. Yeah.
Well, no. Because we're the archaeologists, we're the experts, and they are contracting us to find sites, evaluate sites, work on mitigation, approaches. As far as what is the relevant, necessary level of data collection, that should be falling on us or the regulators, as whoever is dictating, like the agency perhaps, or the SHPO.
Here's an example for you then. The client comes in and says, we have $400,000 to do this project. This project consists of data recovery of 4 archaeological sites of various sizes and depths. I want you to make it fit. So we can't do maybe a comprehensive geoarchaeological analysis or a paleoenvironmental study. That limit of funds and their schedule is going to determine what level of effort we put forward and what level of analysis we do on artifacts. They are, in a way, dictating what we are doing in the field. And even the client works directly with the agencies, and the agency says, okay, you've got $400,000 to do your work. All right, we're going to define our research goals based on what we think we can do for that amount of money.
That was my point at the start of this. Was that's what our methodology is really based on. And I seriously feel like, I don't know if it's through lobbying or through whatever, but you go from, you can work in Utah on one side of the Nevada-Utah state line, and a site is 10 artifacts, and you cross over on the other side of the line, and the site is now 2 artifacts. Okay, those are decisions made by the agencies, based loosely, I think, on the archaeology in the area, but also based on other factors and considerations. Some of those just simply being time. I mean, I've worked on some projects where, it's just an entire lithic landscape. And guess what? The rules change. I mean, we're worse than the Catholic Church. Anytime something happens, we just change the rules. Like we were working on a project where we just had encountering tons and tons and tons of prospect pits and all kinds of stuff. And we knew they were spaced out over a period of time because the area we were working in had gone through booms and busts over like 5 decades. But we ended up calling it all one district because that was easier. Now, maybe that's true. Maybe it was true. But the initial reason was it was easier. It was easier to call it a district so we could just name features and not name sites, right? So, those kinds of considerations are what I'm referring to. Now, what I'm talking about with what the thinking that prompted this entire discussion was, I don't want to take actually more of the client's time and money to record more information. I want to start from not the form and saying, okay, we need to fill in these blanks and record this amount of information, right? I want to start from the top. I want to start from over the form at 100%, okay? If we were actually going to if time and money were not an object, and technology and everything else, we would actually record probably 100% of everything on an archaeological site, because we don't know what's going to be valuable later on to somebody else, right? But obviously that's not possible, okay? So we start from 100% and we come down. And one of the things we did, and this is why I brought up the glass shards, glass shards and debitage, is it's actually valuable information once you start looking at it, and you don't know its value until you see it, to actually know where each one of those things are and how they're distributed. But we don't record that kind of information. But the way we've reworked at least one part of this application is that every time you hit that tally button to actually tally a piece of aqua glass or brown glass, it's taking a point, okay? It's not taking a sub-meter point, but it doesn't need to. It's taking a point, the tablet is. And then at any point in time, you can go back to the map and see like a map of everything that was out there, including the non-diagnostic glass shards. And actually doing this in practice and seeing the crews out there working with it, it's amazing. When you finally see a site for what it really is, rather than just the diagnostic stuff, it really changes your conception of how you look at that site. And that's what I'm talking about. Not using extra time or money, but using the device's capabilities to increase your data collection without increasing the amount of time it takes to do any of that stuff. So that's one of the few things that we're doing, and that's what I want to try to get other people who have the ability to think this way to start thinking about, what are we doing? And Stephen, you're saying this existed in the 90s. Why don't we do it now? Why isn't it a common practice?
Because it's expensive.
It's not, though. The way we're doing it, it's free. It's free.
This was my point. This was my point, is that for what people were doing for surveyors, if you look at, and I don't mean like the guys laying out like property lines, but for surveyors and people doing field data collection that aren't archaeologists, like engineers, people who actually had budgets, this technology has been around for decades.
Of course it has.
And yeah, well, I mean, and that's where the divide between like, oh no, I don't need to use a Trimble, I can use a Garmin, comes in. Is that you have a bunch of archaeologists who basically grew up using Trimbles, where you can do all this stuff. You can do field forms, and you can do digitally structured data, and apply it in novel ways, or ways that show up nicely in the GIS. But this really isn't new. It's just that tablets are making it more affordable.
Yeah,
somewhat. The tablet technology basically went back to just digital paper, like you were complaining about, and it's now starting to drift forward into the actual field collection.
Right. And that's my point. That's my point. I'm not saying we haven't been able to do stuff like this, and we haven't actually been able to do it the way that I'm talking about, though. You have to actually see the thing work. because it really is just as simple as going bam, 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 bam. I can be standing there looking at a whole bunch of glass shards and walking around and literally this fast, just like I would make a tick mark on a piece of paper, going tick, 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 tick. And each one of those times I tap the tablet, it's getting a geolocation point. Okay, way faster than a Garmin, way faster than a Trimble. And much more useful because, like I said, these don't need to be sub-meter. We just need to know generally where they're at. Even if it's 3 meters off, seeing that map of this distribution of these artifacts is quite frankly mind-altering. I don't know how else to explain it. So, and it's stuff like that I'm talking about. Sure, we've had the capability, but the fact is nobody's doing it because it takes extra time and because it takes extra money. But this doesn't do any of that. So, if we're gonna finish this up, this conversation in the first few minutes of the next segment, because I think our next topic is a little shorter anyway. So let's do that when we come back from the break. Professional Certifications for Scientists, or PCS, aims to provide practical educational videos, field guides, knowledge tests, professional certifications, and employment connections to professional scientists everywhere. Check out the videos page for high-quality training videos on a variety of topics. Find PCS videos at www.pcscourses.com/videos. PCS, a place for good scientists to become great science professionals. Okay, we're back, and what I'm finding out about this before we throw it back over to Doug is that through our discussions starting up to the show and then in the background of the chat and then just now over the break, this is a pretty heated topic that we could spend a lot of time on, but I want to wait until we have a little more information before we really dive into this. But Doug, you've got some thoughts on what we've been talking about. What do you got?
Yeah, some general points on both of your guys' side. I'm gonna agree with Stephen. So even not in the 1990s, but still doing it. A company I worked for, we plotted artifacts. Now it wasn't very good and it wasn't 100% accurate, but it didn't really need to be. And this is survey, because basically all you need was to put in a datum. We'd put the GPS unit next to that to get a point, and then with a compass and graph paper, I'd go around and map out the site. And if the site had less than a couple hundred, we'd get most of them. We'd get projectile points. We kind of fudge it, but it didn't actually really matter because, in a sense, when you record something at that detail, anyone coming back even a week later, a lot of those artifacts won't be in that same location. This is a desert. Wind will blow stuff over. They'll change. They'll move. Usually it's near a road. People pick stuff up and so forth. So, I mean, in a sense, that level of detail we've been collecting and have been able to collect for, I'd go back, decades, more than the 1990s. But back to Chris, your point, I'm not sure if we've really fundamentally thought of different ways of capturing sites. And I don't mean just with new technology. I mean fundamentally different ways of thinking of how we record stuff. So one thing that's never really caught on, mainly because it wouldn't work with current laws in almost every country, is a siteless survey. In a sense, you're only recording points and stuff, but you're not drawing a map, because pretty much everything that goes into any sort of database has to say, and there's a line, we've drawn a circle around where the site is. Outside of it's not the site. You can bulldoze whatever you want. Inside is the site. And it's arbitrary. We make very, very arbitrary decisions. And you can do basically density. And it's densities, and you don't draw lines. You just put the artifacts. And been some surveys. There still are people who do those surveys. Bill at the Ancient Mediterranean blog, he does that on his stuff out in the Mediterranean. There are still people who do it. There's been advocates of it. I think it's really cool. And it's a different way of recording a site, but I'm not sure if new technology really needs to drive us to think about different ways to record a site. I think we should think about different ways to record the site and then go out and find the technology to do it. But I'd say, as we've sort of been going back and forth in the conversation, it's all decided by laws and regulations and the client. And I'm not sure if technology is really going to change that, 'cause at the end of the day, you're still going to have to go and say, this is your boundary of your site. It's okay to bulldoze that. It's not okay to bulldoze this. And I mean, if you really want to get sort of philosophical with this, Tom King and his idea of, how we focus on cultural resources and we don't take into account oral histories or basically religion when we're designating what is important culturally. And we mainly focus on, there's been 3 artifacts found in this area. That's something important worth protecting. So, I mean, you can really go down a rabbit hole with this if we want to.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree, and I want to comment on what you said early on in in your comments. One thing you're like, how you're point plotting artifacts on on a paper map by setting a datum. Sure, you said that's been around for decades. I would argue it's been around as long as paper's been around. I mean, you've been able to do that the whole entire time. But the point of the discussion is not that we haven't been able to do that. It's that we haven't been able to afford to do that, right? Because that takes a lot of time. Now, most of the projects, the field pedestrian survey projects I've worked on in Nevada and California, you're simply not going to do that. You might, if you're going to do a paper map, sure, you might go around and roughly ... but you're not going to take a point on or write down every single glass shard or every single lithic artifact, devitage or something like that. You might draw circles, like you said, and say, hey, there's a density here, but you're not going to give each one a point. Now, but when you're going through, in my experience, the person that goes through and tallies all this stuff, unless they're doing a sample, which of course we do samples too, but if they're not doing a sample and they're actually tallying everything that's on that site, they're walking around with their clipboard and they're just going tick, 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 tick on every single different thing that they have, right? They're creating a new category if they find a different color or something like that. And we've created a way to do that digitally and at the same time take a point. That's my point of this. It's kind of, I don't know, it's the way that it's working is kind of revolutionary, and to be able to do that without this whole talk in the background about agencies and everybody else determining our methodologies and budgets, blah, 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 blah. Forget all that. We're taking it out of the equation. It's just you're doing the thing you're already doing and collecting more data, okay? That's what I'm talking about. Not trying to come up with different things and then find the technology or finding a technology and making it work for us. I'm coming from the point of the site saying, I want to record 100% of information, what's available to me to do that, okay? And just trying to get as close to that as possible.
But in a sense, so I guess, yes, I completely get that, Chris, but I'll then ask why. So there's been a big argument of that's basically been going on, especially if you happen to be involved in collections and storing data, is that we're collecting ever larger reams of data.
Mm-hmm.
I completely understand the argument that we collect it because we don't know if we'll need it in the future.
Yeah.
But why does, if no one is ever going to use it?
How do we know that? How can we make that determination?
Well, at a certain point, okay, so I put it this way, Chris. At a certain point, it becomes uneconomical to just have reams and reams of data, and obviously, it's getting more and more economical to do that, where you can go digital. So we no longer have to store, shelves upon shelves of paper, and in a sense, I don't know, probably a 10,000th of the size on a USB stick. Does that, but it's still not without a price. So being able to update stuff and keep it on servers still take up space. They still take up power. And even, I mean, unless you're going to pay a lot of money to get one of those gold CD discs that somehow will last 1,000 years, but then, in 1,000 years, no one's going to be able to read CDs. Heck, we can't even really read floppy disks these days.
Yeah, this is a last ditch effort, though, Doug, to kind of play devil's advocate on this because it's really not a problem. I mean, Moore's law itself states that data storage and the power requirements and things like that and the archivability of these data is simply not going to be a problem within the time span of the technology we're using. Okay, we're constantly innovating different ways to do that, and as far as I'm concerned, we don't want computer scientists doing archaeologists, so we shouldn't do computer science. Okay, we should just trust in the fact that because history has illustrated this for us, that those problems you're discussing aren't really problems, right? They're going to be fixed, and they are being fixed. And the data that we're talking about collecting, the additional data, is so negligible. Where you look at a cost-benefit analysis, the cost of collecting that point data on that glass shard is massively smaller than the cost of not collecting it from a data standpoint. Okay, I mean, who knows what somebody's going to do in 50 years on an analysis of all these, XYZ artifacts in this one area that is just going to change their interpretation of the whole entire thing, and they'll be glad for it. Two things.
Do that.
Well, I don't know, but that's not the point. Here's one thing that's really here's.
That is the point.
But here's
so I have this huge problem, and we're doing, Chris, you're talking about tick boxing. And
Yeah.
what you're talking about is essentially a better horse, where maybe we should be thinking about a better automobile. I mean, to go back to that saying, is that, we're collecting data, but we haven't figured out what we're going to use it for or who's going to use it. And I do wonder if, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it needs to happen, collect data, but I think a more serious problem much sooner down the line is, why are we collecting this data, and what questions are we hoping to answer? And are we just collecting data that's never going to be used? And are we so we're collecting better data, we're collecting more of it, but are we collecting it correctly? Like there's lots of reports. I mean, the vast majority of reports you can go back to, and even the data that's collected is complete and utter crap. Like I've worked with CRM data, and this is not against CRM, this is against everyone's data. And people make mistakes. People do a glitch. You can have a GPS, and you could have put in the wrong coordinate system, and all of a sudden your site's 400 meters away, and it doesn't make sense on a map. Or maybe it does make sense on the map, but it's in the wrong location. So you've got biased data. And so collecting more data is not necessarily a good thing if it's just going to be unusable in the future, because we still have really good data from lots of reports and lots of information that we've collected over, God, I don't know, 150 years. Go back to the first archaeologists, and most of that's not usable. So even if we collect more of it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good or usable for someone's needs.
So that is such an interesting way of thinking about things that I almost can't even believe it, because to try to determine what future researchers are going to be able to ask as far as research questions goes is insane. And from a CRM archaeology standpoint, that's not even our job. Okay, we have research questions in our reports because the agencies have us put research questions in there, quite honestly. But the real thing is, we're collecting data because that site is going to be destroyed, okay? We're collecting data because somebody is right behind us with a bulldozer or a stick of dynamite, and it's gone, okay? That's why we're collecting data, and that's why we're determining what's there. Is it important? Should we throw another $100,000 at this site before they destroy it? Because they're still going to destroy it. So that's what we're doing. And one of the things that... one of the things that really sticks in my mind is when I visited Chaco Canyon years back, and reading some stuff in the little museum they've got there, or the whatever. Early explorers coming out this way that camped at Pueblo Bonito down there in the right down there in the canyon. They were inside the Pueblo and setting up their fires and their little cook stoves in the same locations that the Native Americans did, because it looked like, they could see the soot and the staining on the walls from fires and things like that. And it was a good location. So bam, let's just camp here and let's do that. They completely destroyed the carbon-14 dating potential of those particular rooms in those areas because they had their fires. Well, of course, C14 dating wasn't invented for another 60 years from when they first found that site. So How were they to know that these little carbon samples or these little they were pulling tree logs and stuff out of window frames and stuff to burn too, because there was nothing else to burn. How are they to know that that was going to be important for future researchers? They couldn't know. So it's not even worth asking the question. If we have the ability to collect more data without it costing more money and without it costing more time, why are we even having this argument? Why would you argue against collecting data if it doesn't cost anything extra? That's my point. We're not talking about taking more time or taking more money or inventing a technology that doesn't exist. It's using what we have to collect more data. We don't know what it's worth. Maybe it's worth nothing. I don't know. But why not do it if you can do it for free?
But then, so no, I understand. Do it for free. But I'm saying is we should really think about, so let's take it further down the line to when the researcher gets there. Now, so a researcher, when you're doing research, you have two choices. One, you create an experiment or an idea or a hypothesis, and then you go out and test it. The other way is you get data and it comes from someone else, and then you basically look through correlations in that data and try to sort of make sense of it. And, some projects do a mixture of both, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the data approach is you can't ask these questions to data that someone else has collected. You can't make the data collection work. And so basically you're stuck with the data that you're given. And I work with this all the time. It's the data you have. And so you can only ask the questions out of that data, which basically biases you towards what someone else collected subconsciously or consciously. And so you can end up with really bad results because basically you're ending up with biased data. I'm not saying we shouldn't be collecting it. More data, it's great. Yes, more data. But I think we really need to think really carefully about what we're collecting now, because now basically we're destroying stuff and we're making decisions subconsciously or unconsciously about what we're collecting. And so, yes, we may collect more of it, but it may not help anyone in the future, or worse, it gives them a false sense of what's happening because that's the only data they have. You've basically made a bias. You've made a biased data set. Almost all data sets in archaeology are biased, and that's fine. You work with that bias.
But I'm talking about removing the bias, removing the bias and collecting everything.
No, but you're not, because you can't collect everything. Even with this digital, even when you're going around and you're collecting, basically artifact points, you're still missing all the soil. You should actually be scanning the soil and collecting that information. And the technology is not going to be there for decades more.
Right, but we should be thinking about it.
Yeah, but we should be thinking about what we're actually collecting much more in detail. I think we should be thinking about, actually, should we be developing technology to sample soil much better and because now we just basically Munsell sell it and say, dose a little water in it, roll it into a ball, and it's silty clay, which actually tells us almost nothing.
Right. So because we can't do that, we shouldn't do other data collection that we actually have the capability of doing? Is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm saying we should really be thinking really clearly about what data we're going to collect. I mean, just collecting data because we can and it's easier. Yes, think of it as like first aid. Yeah, that's a good thing to do, but you really should be focusing on, making sure that people don't get hurt in the first place. We should really be putting our energy towards focusing on what data we really want to get out of it and focus on that. And yes, randomly collecting as much data as possible. Do it if it's costing no money, but I think you're focusing the energy in the wrong questions. You should be focusing it on basically what do we want to answer? Because even collecting these points, we're still missing so much information. And I don't mean to be negative and say we shouldn't be collecting it. Archaeology is incremental. We always get better, but I think we really need to dramatically rethink how we define things and why we're going out and collecting it, and then put a lot of effort into doing different ways.
Can I interject really quickly? Just one quick.
Oh, if you can do it in 10 seconds, you can.
Data is not all the data that we collect is an interpretation of what's actually there. And I think that part of what Doug's getting at is that we need to be cognizant that the data, those interpretations that we're taking are actually applicable. And now that we're in a technological position where we can collect more and more data, we're actually finding that a lot of that data isn't applicable in the way that we envisioned it on a larger scale.
That's exactly it.
That was 45 seconds.
Okay, man.
I guess. All right. Let's go to a break and we'll come back. Let's go to a break. We'll come back. Back in a second. This is one of our another one of our business tips from Christopher Dorr at Heritage Business International. Go check out their website.
Hi everyone. This is Christopher Dorr with Heritage Business International, and here's this week's Heritage Business tip from the archive. This week, we look at the value of clients. Take your most profitable client to lunch this week. Your most profitable client may not be your largest client. Take this opportunity to crunch last year's data to see which client had the biggest profit contribution in dollars, not in percent. You might be surprised who it is, and perhaps a little thanks is overdue. To receive our most up-to-date Heritage Business tips, you can subscribe to our free weekly email at heritagebusiness.org. Until next time, this is Christopher Dorr.
Okay, we're back, and as usual, we could probably talk for the rest of this fine Sunday morning, afternoon, evening for some people, on this entire topic. But I feel like we're kind of going around in circles here, and we need to have some more discussion about it. Also, over on the Archaeotech podcast, as I mentioned earlier, in the next episode or two, we're going to have an entire discussion about the app that we're calling Codify. Over at codify.com. Although don't go to that website yet because we're redoing the website. Well, if you're listening to this in the future, though, hey, go check it out. So anyway, we're going to skip over a discussion we were going to have about DINA, the Digital Index of North American Archaeology. They just received a whole bunch more NSF funding to help them expand. If you want to check them out, look them up in the show notes, or type in DINAA into Google, and it's about the only thing. I think it is the only thing that shows up, and you can find some information about what they're doing in the Southeast and moving across the country as we speak. And this new funding will help them suck more states into the DINA system, and you can find out what's going on there. So we'll have the architects of DINA on the CRM Arc podcast again in the future. But for now, we're going to move on. And I saw the next topic I'm calling free archaeology, for lack of a better word. And I don't think it's a free archaeology in the sense that this discussion was really happening over in the UK a year or two ago with the free archaeology hashtag. That seemed to me, and unless I've got this wrong, it seemed to be more about, hiring interns and things like that, and people to just essentially actually work for free. But what I'm talking about is the discussion that's been happening on Facebook and ArchaeoFieldTechs, and I think Bill White may have written a blog post about this, is more what people are calling free archaeology over here, which is some of that work that you're tend to ask to do after work, depending on what your job is, and other things like that. And I've got some pretty serious thoughts on that. And I'll just kick this off then. So to me, it really depends on the position you're in. If you're a field technician and you're hourly, which most field technicians are generally hourly, unless you work for a bigger company where everybody's salary. So then that kind of changes things a little bit. But if you're hourly and you're a field technician, my thoughts are you should never be asked to work more than the 40 hours a week that you're contracted to work, okay? Now, that being said, if you're getting paid overtime, fantastic. But if you're not, if overtime's not part of the equation, which it often isn't, then you shouldn't be asked to do that. Now, again, as a business owner, I have a slightly, expanded take on that. I mean, if we're in the middle of a transect, a 2-mile long transect, and for one reason or another, we didn't make it back to the truck in time to get back to the hotel or wherever we're staying at the exact end of your 8-hour day, then we finish the transect, okay? We finish the transect, we work a little extra, but as a good crew chief or project manager or whoever the senior person is in the field, you'll make that up at some other point, whether it's, I don't know, starting later the next day. Because you always say, oh, we'll leave early one day, but that never happens because you're always doing stuff. So saying you leave early one day almost never works out. So maybe start later one day, or maybe call, the last day if it's a 10-day session or something, or even a 5-day week, maybe call that early or something like that to make up for it. So, yeah, Steven's saying or pay overtime in the background, but a lot of contracts simply don't allow overtime to be paid. It's just not part of it. So that's what I'm going under. If you can pay overtime, obviously pay overtime. But if you can't, then you have to have a workaround. And one of the other things I want to bring up, and then I'll open it up to you guys for discussion, is a long discussion we've had, especially out here in the West, where your travel times to and from the work site could be an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and you end up with an actual only like a 5-hour workday in the field. That's my last project was like that. We had certain areas that were, it was an hour and a half to get out to these areas just to work, but it was still an 8-hour day. So we'd drive out an hour and a half, we'd practically be break time by then, and then we'd do survey, then we'd have a half an hour lunch, do some more survey, then it's practically break time again, and then we drive back. So that's an 8-hour day. But a lot of times, we take, just like we see per diem as, the government sees per diem as covering our food and lodging, we see per diem as paying our bills, right? So, people will try to sacrifice food and lodging a little bit just so they can have that extra money per diem. Well, we see the same thing when in the commute time for work. Some people will maybe stay up later or not get up as early as they thought they should have, and they'll sleep in the car on the way out to the work site, or they'll sleep in the car on the way back from the work site. My thinking is, again, as a business owner, and I'm interested to get Sonia's take on this, she works in the West too and probably has long commute times, is if there's actually work to do, if there's like maybe transect planning or paperwork to fill out or whatever you got to do, then it should be getting done in the car if you can. If the person gets car sick, you have to deal with that. But if you can do it in the car and it's not a bumpy road and it's something that can actually happen, you should actually be doing those things rather than relying on the crew chief or somebody else to do it after work. Okay? That's still paid work time. It's not paid sleep time. So if there's nothing to do, fine, take a nap. More power to you. But if you can do it, you should be doing it. And that's I've seen some discussion about that, and some people call it work creep, where they're asked to do different things, and I don't know, they're asked to do stuff maybe outside of work, and maybe they're not compensated for it properly or something like that. But I feel like it all kind of works out in the wash eventually. When we don't have a 9-to-5 job that's Monday through Friday, where we go to work and then we forget about it when we go home and we're back with our families. We simply don't have that in most cases. We're autonomous little units. We're teams that are working out in the field. We're all staying in the same location, and we're all working together every single day. And we need to look at it like that, as more of a team, to get everything done. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. If you don't want to play as a team, well, you don't want to play as a team. But personally, I'm not looking for people that are looking for a 9-to-5 job. I'm looking for people that are wanting to get a job done and get compensated for it at the same time, but understand that there's give and take on the schedule. So, Sonia, I want to throw it over to you. We've worked in obviously a lot of the same areas and under the same conditions. How do you deal with some of the things I brought up?
Well, work creep is just that. It's work creep. I generally try to pay my employees for the work that they do after hours, because in some cases it really sucks.
Oh yeah.
That you don't have time to yourself, or that you don't have time to relax. And usually that work creep is limited to higher level individuals, your field directors, your crew chiefs, individuals that you trust to get the work done. Now, I'm not saying that it's the right thing to do, and I'm not saying that I always want them to do it. But this is my attitude. If a field technician is consistently not getting their paperwork done during the day like they're supposed to, they need to get that work done. They may need to get it done in the car, and if they don't get it done in the car, they're going to need to get it done after hours. And I can't. I want to say at their own cost, because that field technician needs to learn that they need to get their time budgeted properly while in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not 100% of the time. Most people can get their work done during the day when they're getting paid to get that work done. Now, there have been a few situations, most recently in the last month, actually, where one of my crew chiefs and field directors were saying, "Hey, I'm I'm not getting my personal time. You're expecting me to do work after hours. And I'm like, the client has asked for things that are technically out of scope, but we can't modify this contract. It's one of those lump sum, no contract modification type contracts. The client has requested that we get this GIS data produced and sent to them. And I need you to do this work to get this done after hours.
Mm-hmm.
When something like that happens, that's paid time.
Yeah.
If your boss is asking you to do something that's not paid time, that you couldn't do during the day, that should be that's not right. They should be paying you for your time.
Right.
And that should be considered overtime or whatever it is. Different companies manage overtime differently depending on what state you're in and all that other stuff. I honestly get frustrated because as a business owner and a field director and a principal investigator, I basically work from 5:36 in the morning till about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I get paid for 8 hours. So really complaining to me that you're not getting your personal time is not, you're not going to get much out of me on that one.
Right.
But at least you're getting paid for it. In terms of not getting paid, honestly, to me, it's, hey, we'll start 15 minutes later or we'll get off 15 minutes early tomorrow. That's fine. In not getting paid, if you're consistently not getting your work done during the day, your paperwork or whatever it is, by golly, you're going to be doing that in the car, and you're going to be getting that done after hours. Because I'll tell you, I have had to record on a photo log over 200 photos that some jackass never recorded.
Right.
And that pissed me off. You're going to get it done. If it's your task, you're going to get it done.
Well, it'll please you to know, before I throw it back over to Stephen, our application will record that photo log information for you. Not to backslide to the last segment, but the photo captions are done. Anyway, Stephen, you have a comment on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would, running counter to something that someone said about people not wanting to do extra work. That part of that is, like when you Sonia, or the business owner is working 12, 14-hour days and only pulling 8 hours of pay. Yeah, but you're the business owner. You are building your particular business and brand. When someone is brought on for a project, say, and then you're like, well, I need you to work an extra 2 hours tonight. And it's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, people have plans. People are working on other projects. They could be, trying to finish that master's thesis. That there are non-work related things that they're doing to improve upon their particular career. I mean, there's a negotiation, because 9 times out of 10 will be like, hey, yeah, I could use a couple extra hours. Let's do it. But there needs to be that consideration that, I mean, just because they work for you does not mean that their entire day is yours. And I know that Chris has made that point at numerous occasions in the past, that, it's that there is a dialogue that needs to go on there.
You're right, Stephen. You can always say no. Anytime someone asks you if you can do work after hours, you can say no. You have a choice, and you can also say, will I be getting paid for that? I mean, I have no issue with someone saying to me, if I say, hey, I have some extra work, would you like to do it? Or I could really use your help. Can you do it? The next question I expect is, sure, will I get paid for it? And if I say no, then they can say no. Your time, an employee is not property They are not a servant or a slave in any way. They should be compensated for their time. My point earlier was that if an employee is hired to, say, dig, 2 excavation units a day, and they're not getting their paperwork done during the day when they're supposed to be, they shouldn't be soliciting time after hours to say, hey, I need to get paid extra time to do this. They should be getting it done during the day. And if they're not,
I totally agree. I was not actually talking about that part.
There are some times when the client will surprise you and say, hey, I need this. Can you get it for me? I can say no. And in fact, I've said it's going to take 2 or 3 days to get it to you. And usually the client's like, okay. And I say, look, that's the deal. You're asking for work that's outside of our scope and our time. But there are other times when he's like, I really need it as soon as you can get it to me. And okay, in the next couple of days, I can ask my employees, hey, can you work a few hours afterwards? I will pay you to do it. And I guess I don't like people working for free. I've heard of, and I've seen companies who have said, oh no, you're going to do the photo log or whatever it is, after hours, and you're not going to get paid for it. Photo log should be done in the field. It should be.
Yeah.
It really should. Otherwise, people forget things.
Well,
field paperwork should be done in the field. It should be. It doesn't always happen. But consistently doing it, like delaying work and waiting for it until after hours and then coming back and saying, no, I need more time to get this done, or not doing something intentionally, that's not cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm beating around. I'm just circling now.
We've only got a few minutes left, and we're going to throw it over to Doug. But I will agree with you real quick, Sonia. If it's something that can be done in the field, like site descriptions, all your paperwork, feature stuff, photo logs, if somebody chooses to just take notes on those things and then fill it out later, they're choosing to fill it out later on their own time, because you're paid to do it while you're sitting on the site where your information is fresh. If you take shorthand or you do anything like that, that's your workflow, and you can accurately describe that stuff later in your hotel room or wherever you're staying. It's going to be on your own time. So anyway, we've only got a couple minutes left. Let's throw it over to Doug, because you had a comment earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know, Chris, even though it's not quite the same as free archaeology in the UK when they were talking about that a couple of years back, I think fundamentally it's slightly different, but it really should come down to the individual. It's very similar. You guys, anyone who's being asked to do work should be thinking about how it affects them and what they're getting out of it. So the thing in the UK was, people were complaining that they were having to go to, pay for field schools, pay to do work. But in a sense, you were investing in yourself. And you were investing in your future by doing that, even if it was costing you money. Almost everyone now, UK, Canada, America, you pay for university. You're paying to invest in yourself. And some people are paying for a good time, and that's fine. That's what you're paying for. And you need to really be thinking about, if you accept this extra work, are you investing in yourself? Is this something that will help you out in the long term? And I think we've already touched on this, but basically, if a company, stuff happens, something goes wrong, someone gets a flat tire, can't make it out, you lose a couple of hours, you need to make that up. There's no budget. Yeah, stuff happens, and you need to decide if you're going to be a team player and help out your fellow coworkers. And that is investing in yourself. You're building relationships. But if a company is constantly, basically, is under budget entire project, and basically asking you to constantly do extra work after time, because basically they've said, oh, you need to survey so many acres that is not physically humanly possible. So you run through it and you don't really record properly just so you can make that time. That's not investing in yourself. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to do too much work. You're going to get sick. You're going to just get mentally drained. And that's not investing in yourself. That's a horrible thing. So you really need to look around and say, is this company just burning me out? with all this extra work? And I think every person who's being asked to do work really needs to be asking, am I investing in myself? So am I getting paid? Well, that's a tangible something that you're investing, but are you getting something else out of it? Are you getting, favors, social capital? Is it going to help you in 3 months when they're looking around and deciding who's going to be let go and who's going to be kept on for the next project? And that's a very solid thing. That's a bit of almost a threat that's sort of in the back of a lot of people's minds of, oh, I might get let go. But again, if there's that threat and you're thinking, oh, if I don't do this work, I might lose my job, have a real consideration. Is your job, is that healthy? Is this the company you want to be working for?
Right.
And even, for owners as well, if you're working 80 or 90, hours a week, you're investing in your company, and that could, in the future, definitely pay off. When, you could sit back and watch the money roll in, or it could just be that you've basically invested a lot of time and you're not going to get it back. But I think that's the key thing when considering about, work creep is what are you going to get out of it? And, is it a benefit or is it not?
Yeah, you're totally right, Doug. I've been a fan of the invest in yourself hashtag that I've been using for a number of different things. And archaeology, I'm just going to wrap this up in the last couple seconds here. Archaeology is not like other jobs, and people that think it is need to find another job, because if you're looking for a 9 to 5 where you can go to your work, make your money, and then not think about it later on, you're probably in the wrong field. Because if you're not thinking about this stuff, if you're not, really diving into, I'm not saying don't have other hobbies, but archaeology is more than just a job. It's a lifestyle, and it's a way of, it's a way of being. It's just the way that it is. It has to be a passionate thing that you do because of how we're compensated. Nobody's in this for the money. Nobody's in this for the fame or the riches, all that stuff. It's not all Indiana Jones. So, you got to have some other way to look at it. So anyway, that's going to be it for this show. Let's continue this discussion and the last discussion on Facebook or on the comments page for the show or wherever you see it. So that's it. That's it for this week, and we'll be back again. We've got some potentially fun interviews coming up that I'm still in the works for scheduling, so keep an eye out for those, and we'll see you next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArcPodcast, or you can tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.